Black Earth offers a full suite of humic solutions, from high-purity granules to powder, liquid, and soluble formulations, all powered by pure Humulite, trusted by growers worldwide from one of the world's rarest Humulite reserves. Grow stronger with the power of Black Earth Humulite. Learn more from Mind to Market by visiting blackearth.com.
The Agronomist is brought to you by The Corn School, The Edible Bean School, and Farming Forward. Farming Forward is a video series brought to you by the Farm Resilience Mentorship Program. Sharpen your soil health expertise with cover cropping, nitrogen management, and advanced grazing. Visit realagriculture.com or find it on YouTube. Hi everyone, welcome to The Agronomists. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. I am going to try not to melt. It is incredibly humid and very hot here in the Ottawa Valley, but hey, that is what summer is all about, I guess. So as you can see, I have my air going. It's an old farmhouse. It doesn't get very cool up here in the top area, so we're gonna try. I'm going to stay hydrated. I hope you all will as well. And we're going to have a great show. Thanks to everybody joining us, of course, right here off the hop. Great to see everyone jumping in. It feels like I've been gone a while, even though it was only a couple weeks. Thank you, of course, to Peter Pete Johnson for hosting last show. I don't believe he's going to make the comments tonight. So if anybody wants to let me in on any critiques they had of his hosting capabilities, you just let me know. Okay. Of course, if you collect those CEU credits, head on over realagriculture.com/agronomists. You can fill out the form there. Let us know you took in the show. We'll get those CEU credits off to you. And while you're there, sign up for the email. It goes out to remind you of what show is coming up, when it's going live, and to sign back in and get those CEU credits. So a good reminder there. So do that while you are there. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting couple weeks here on the disease front. So we thought, why not? Let's talk tar spot. And frankly, my timing was impeccable. So to have that conversation, let's bring in our guests. We've got the Ontario Ministry. I have to read this, Albert. Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness. Albert Tenuta, how are you?
Hello. I am great. You are hot, eh?
Oh my gosh. It's so gross, you guys. Yes. Anyway, I'm struggling a little bit, but that's because I'm used to much cooler temps, but that's okay. Also joining us, first time on The Agronomists, we have Stephanie Divitaris with Syngenta, based near Woodsley, Ontario, which I just learned is very far away from where I am.
Yes, thank you. It's great to be here.
I also learned, just before we went live, Albert let us know that, Stephanie, your area apparently has the longest running, what is it, Phytophthora nursery? Canada nursery? Albert, have you toured it many times?
Oh, it was a staple. We go all the time. It's been there since the mid-70s.
Okay.
It's the holy grail of Phytophthora.
Yeah. Do you go there for lunch? Like just to look at the plots? And
we just go and bask in its glories.
Or not.
I did put in 5 years as a summer student there, though, so I'm quite familiar with it.
You are very familiar. Okay, that checks. All right. I didn't know. We're all learning together, everybody, because I didn't know about these things. So glad that we have them. Long-term trials are pretty important for so many different things. Stephanie, as your first time here with Syngenta, obviously in the Woodsley area, tell us a bit about what you do, what area do you cover, and how do things look there this week?
Yeah, so I have been with Syngenta for 17 years, in this role for 11, and I cover basically Essex, Kent, and Chatham-Kent, and a little bit into Elgin and Lambton counties as needed. Things in the county are changing, or the counties are changing significantly this week with the heat and the moisture. Before that, I would say very variable, depending on where you were, but they have improved significantly, so that's pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So were you on the dry side before you got some rain, or did it depend where you were?
Absolutely. So some areas were dry and then some were very wet, depending on where you were within the counties. Some got dumped on with anywhere between 7 to 8 inches of rain, and then others didn't get it. So it just depends on where you were and soil type and kind of location close to the water for the most part.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark's got a question about the smoky, smoggy conditions, and it relates to tar spot, so we will get to that. But we did talk today on the radio show, on Raylag Radio, about smoky conditions, because of course here, I'm not sure what it's like where you are, Albert. Here in the Ottawa Valley, we were very smoky today and have been for the past few days. Not ideal, obviously. How about where you are near Ridgetown?
Today's not too bad. I think over the next couple of days we're going to get some more impact of the forest fires and the smoke coming down our way as well. But definitely a concern, and again shows how things can change the environment and the impacts as well.
Okay, so tonight's topic is tar spot. And Producer Jay, if you would, we Pete Played Photographer, we've got a Twitter post here. I still call them tweets, you guys. I'm not going to stop doing such. Excellent stance there, Albert. So letting us know that tar spot officially arrived July 6th. And so I say with a question, because did it arrive July-ish 6th?
Oh, it arrived in 2020, September 27th of 2020, not far from where I'm standing there in Ridgetown, as well as in the Rodney area, which is not too far from where my bud is right now here at home. And that. So that's when the arrival came, or the first detection of it, with those spore fronts, as you can see there, with those arrows in that showing the movement for tar spot into southern Ontario, into Ontario, as well as into eastern Ontario, Quebec, and the potential for the Maritimes as well. And so now that it's established for primarily most of the province, we did see Kemptville last year in the fall also detecting tar spot. It's not so much arrival, it's our first detection, when it goes first through its first cycle and we start seeing the symptoms, those beautiful little stroma, those black tar spots on the leaves.
Trust a pathologist to call them beautiful. But now, Stephanie, you are sort of, where you're based and the years that you have been there. Of course, as we see things move into Ontario, often they would come through your territory. How have the last few years gone with tar spot? What has the sort of experience been in dealing with a new corn disease?
Yeah, so I would say it really started back in 2021 for us, where we first saw it. And then it's just obviously progressed significantly since then. So it's basically covering majority of my trading area anyway. And it's been a learning curve for everyone. It all depends on when it comes in, how it affects, does it overwinter or has it overwintered, and what are the resources and the tools we can use to help manage this disease going forward. So it's been a learning curve, and I think for everyone, and we're getting there. It just takes time and conversation.
Albert, in your career, how many new corn leaf diseases have you had to navigate the arrival of in Ontario?
Well, in terms of corn, most of the diseases were already established. The big ones, the northern corn leaf blights, the gibberellas, and all that. Tar spot, and a few. Gray leaf spot is one that we've seen an increase since I started in 1991. But tar spot's the big one, right? And so it is the one that's gained a lot of attention. As Stephanie mentioned, we've learned a lot. I think it's when we start seeing or hearing about these potential insect disease, weed, pest problems, and that, there's always that fear, right, of the unknown and what's going to happen. One of the nice things, and in all my career, I've always tried to be prepared for things, so I already anticipate things. The next one's going to be soybean red crown rot, so you're going to probably within the next year or something, we'll probably be looking at that and finding it in Ontario as well. And again, it's just anticipating things and being prepared. And tar spot was one of those examples that quite quickly we knew that the management growers were doing, what retailers and ag business and that inputs, etc. We have the tools to manage it. We just had to put the package together for tar spot.
Producer Jay, can you bring up? I think it's the first slide we want to start with. We might do things in order here, guys. This is very unlike me. But but walk us through, as Stephanie mentioned, whether or not it overwintered. We talk about its arrival, but really it's a finding. So walk us through this, Albert, as to where this disease sort of came from, and what its status sort of is in Ontario now. Is it overwintering, or does it still make its way in?
Yeah, I think it's a two-factor. There's two phases to tar spot. One is that overwintering component, and that goes for the Midwest U.S. when it was first found in 2015, and then it's continued to establish through it. And you can see from this image here, this comes from our cropprotectionnetwork.org website. So we do real-time tracking of both tar spot, northern corn leaf blight, and a whole bunch of other diseases as well there. And you can see those gray areas there is the, since 2015 where we've seen tar spot. You can see in Ontario, much of the Midwest Corn Belt, as well as into Ontario. Last year, the big jump into east of Toronto, into that Kemptville area, and now also into Quebec as well. And you're starting to see that eastern progression there as well. The yellow are the new confirmed identifications of tar spot up to this morning, and that as well.
Okay.
And you can see for Ontario, Chatham-Kent, Elgin, as well as Halderman, Norfolk.
Okay, so those yellow spots are this year's detection so far, as of today.
Correct.
So
and notice that one in New York, right next to Niagara Falls, or Niagara as well, and that. And Essex, where Stephanie is, has always been one of the hotspots in the overwintering locations that it is now endemic as well.
Mm-hmm. So Stephanie, thinking about that as far as the overwintering and conditions, etc., when do you start looking for this disease? Because of course, Albert has, that's all he does is look for disease, but you have other things to do. But when do you have a reminder in your phone, like first week of July, or when do you start looking for this disease?
I feel like we're scouting fields all season long, depending on what we're doing. So it's like I just do it inherently. Like you just start to look for it, and I haven't seen any yet in my trading area as of today. I would say walking through cornfields today, but it just becomes second nature because of what we do. You always look for it. You try to, but I mean, when you're walking some fields looking for weeds, you might miss it. But for the most part, it's just what I do.
Yeah. Always looking for it. Now, I did notice that Warren Schneckber has jumped on the call. He is, of course, here in Eastern Ontario where I am. And to his point, oh joy, finding it a little further into Quebec and on stateside as well. But it looks like anyway, Albert, there's a bit of a gap in between. So how does tar spot move? Maybe now's a good time to put up, Jay, could you put up slide 2? It's the life cycle, because I want to talk about the life cycle and how it moves. So where does it move? There we go.
Yeah. So with tar spot, it is an airborne pathogen that resides in the residue on the corn plants and that. So we have, as I mentioned, with Ontario and the Midwest, we have two different ways by which tar spot can move, and it can infect. It overwinters, as we see now, and established through basically from Toronto over to Stephanie's area, and now as we start seeing that established east of Toronto into Quebec, it becomes a region, not even a field issue. It will start becoming a regional issue. Start thinking gibberella, white mold, and many of these other diseases. And what we're seeing, and this is why we spend a lot of time working with our U.S. colleagues to track diseases and that. You can see from those yellow conformations in the U.S., that is another avenue by which the spores can move in, right? And so if you look at that life cycle there, you can see that starting in early spring, the residue, the fungus overwinters in that infested residue, starts moving up. The ascospores move from that residue onto the developing corn plants, start to infect those leaves, usually on the lower canopy, and that's another indication of where's the disease coming from, where the spores are coming from. If you find it on the lower canopy, it's within field. If it is higher up, then it's being blown in as well. And then once it starts to cycle, every 2 weeks or so to 3 weeks, and then you just start getting that snowballing effect going on. And that's where temperature, moisture, and the weather conditions are critically important.
Mm-hmm. Which we are going to talk about. Stephanie, I've got a great question for you. Warren wants to know, Farmer Schneck wants to know, is it obvious to find, or is it a scavenger hunt like
Oh,
WBC? Stephanie, are you
it,
out there
Every
like flipping
oh,
leaves? Yeah.
every weed, every disease is a scavenger hunt. If you don't make it
Oh,
fun, then there's no sense doing it. So,
okay.
but I would say it is. I wouldn't say it's obvious when the pressure is low, but once you get that onset of, I'm sure Alberta talked about leaf wetness and that prolonged period of wet, then you will see it as obvious. And I think Mark made a very valid point too, that if you lick it and it comes off, it is not tar spot. So
But
very
but
good detection skills from Mark Davis.
but then you've
yeah,
also
yeah,
licked it, and we don't know what it is then. Anyway,
yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
there's
we usually say wet your fingers, rub it, and all that stuff. Licking is another different
it's
approach
another
there,
way.
Mark, and we'll have to add that to our series of scouting tips.
Yeah.
I
Or
thought
maybe
from
the
COVID we
don't.
learned not to lick
Yeah.
things, but
But
apparently not.
Mark did not learn that lesson. Now, okay, I want to, producer Jay, leave this slide up because there's a few things to unpack from this one, and Albert, as you mentioned, where you may find it may indicate sort of where it came in, and those sorts of things. But we've got, of course, Westerners on our call, and from that map, I mean, obviously, yes, we have found it in the past years in Ontario, and now, the first detections have gone up. But of course, we have corn that grows well into Manitoba, in Alberta, in BC.
Mhm.
Jason Vogt shares, in southern Manitoba, we've been primarily drier than normal. In some areas have more moisture. It got as far as Grand Forks County, North Dakota. What is the potential into Manitoba? How, I guess, even put another way, is just how far can this move in one season, let's say?
Well, the 2015, find in Indiana, Illinois, and that more than likely came in through from Mexico or the extreme southern U.S., but more than likely Mexico. So you're looking at hundreds, thousands of miles, right? Potentially
Yeah.
with any of these airborne diseases, and that jump from Grand Forks over into southern Manitoba is not a big jump when it comes to tar spot and other airborne diseases. It'll be wind patterns and movement, as you see with the discussion here about the smoke and that. A lot of the wind current patterns right now for much of that area is from Canada, from the prairies down, right? So it's the
That's right. Yeah.
opposite. Whereas we're seeing all those storm fronts coming up through the Ohio Valley, and that's pushing that potential spore movement up here. So again, keep an eye on where those storms are coming and the wind patterns as well. But wherever corn's grown, more than likely we're going to end up seeing it. So I would
Yeah.
expect the pattern has been through the Dakotas, Minnesota, and that moving north. And so in Manitoba, more than likely, we should see it probably in the next couple of years. Again, depending on corn acres and that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, so to that point, Stephanie, as Albert pointed out, you may find it lower canopy, you may find it higher canopy. In your experience, when it has first come in, yes, it's a good point. Does it rub off? Does it not? When you have first found it, was it very obvious that this is tar spot, or what are other things it might look like that it can be dismissed for? Maybe.
I would definitely say at first it was not obvious that this was tar spot. Having dealt with it for quite a few years, you do know, and you can look for it. Like they said, try and rub it off. If it comes off, it's not. And then once the disease progresses, it does have those lesions kind of around it, or there's circles around it, so that it does look kind of like, I don't know what they call it, an eye spot type of deal. But typically, when we first started to see it, it was coming in on the top of the canopy. Now that the disease is here and has progressed, we do see it coming from the bottom and from the top, depending on weather patterns. So you can have infection from both ways, right? So it just depends on the year, the environment, and I think it's really important to talk about the disease cycle, right? You need the pathogen, you need the host, and you need the environment. Without those three, you won't have the disease. So it's always, we can't predict what Mother Nature is going to do, but we have to be aware that without those three things, we can't have the disease there.
Mm-hmm. And I know there will be plenty of questions about the weather side. Go ahead, Albert.
So, and it also depends on what time of the year you're scouting too. Like right now,
Yep.
everything, like I don't know how many pictures I got today, but it's all insect poop, right? A lot of it is that and frass. And again,
Frass. Yeah.
whether you lick it or wet it or rub it or whatever, more than likely it comes off and that. And you know, we're seeing aphids, other things like that, insects as well that potentially could look very similar to it, and as well as there's saprophytic fungi that provide a black spotting on leaves too, but those are always flat. They're really flat, and insect poop also will be flat on the leaf, whereas with tar spot and that stroma, that little bump or volcano type structure on there, that tar spot, it's got that raised appearance to it. And then later on in the season, then we start seeing it, you know, being confused, maybe early stages of northern corn leaf blight, gray leaf spot, common rust, particularly when it takes that black stage teliospore stage of it as well. So there's a lot of things that can be confused with it. But right now, even though I think I know what I'm looking for tar spot, early on, it is still a guess at the beginning. And I bring stuff into the lab and let it sit for a couple of days before we confirm it as well.
Okay. Well, if it's even tricking you, Albert, goodness. We have some things. Okay, but I do like that distinguish of, you know, it being raised versus flat. And if you really want to lick your leaves, you can do that too. But I don't think frass is delicious, everybody. Okay, we're going to go to a clip, and then I want to come back to this because I want to talk a bit more about the life cycle and other diseases that, you know, may come into play, and of course the weather. But Producer Jay, let's go to the first clip with Greg Stopps. Which sort of tackles some of this overwintering and potentially going in too late with fungicide. Because, of course, we want to talk about how we manage this disease once we do know that we have it. So, Producer Jay, if you will, we'll go to the clip.
This year, because even though those trace amounts were there last year, those trace amounts overwintered. And we saw some storm systems bring more of it in as well, and we sure enough saw it settle in kind of in that July timeframe. And that has really kind of established itself as we've gone on with really conducive weather for the disease through August and now even in September, and looking at our forecast on for the next few weeks, right? So that disease is moving through its life cycle fairly rapidly, and it continues to do so as that polycyclic disease, causing more and more potential damage.
Now, a big part of this equation, obviously, is genetics and fungicides. This year, growers are seeing it for the first time and reacting. You know, we always focus on that VG R1 timing and application. Some growers didn't get that this year, and then they're coming late. What are you hearing about, I guess, that late arrival and the impact it's having?
Yeah, so I think, you know, we are getting a lot of those questions, and I think to be transparent as the industry, there's a lot we need to learn about the disease, but thankfully we've got some really good people in the industry on the seed side of the industry as well as on kind of the chemical and the pathology side. And a large amount of work has been done in the public sector by folks like Albert Tenuta. Got to give him huge credit for some of the work he's done on tar spot, and his counterparts through the U.S. as well. To really kind of look at how the disease works and to figure out some of those questions around spray timing, right? What pays, what's going to maximize our ROI. Certainly when we saw the disease start to come in July, ahead of tassel, we tried to get the word out to those areas as much as possible to consider spraying and spray with the best possible products that provide control. And kind of hold off that spray until that tassel timing window, where then we can kind of kill two birds with one stone if possible, right? The same kind of conditions that allow for tar spot infection and proliferation are going to allow for that silk channel infection of jib, which causes us so many problems with dawn accumulation in southwestern Ontario. And if we can really nail both of those at silk timing, there's some great fungicide products out there that offer that tar spot control and suppression of jib all in one, you know, then that's the timing we want to get. Those products also provide a fairly lengthy window of protection that seems to protect through a good chunk of August and really will ultimately suppress some of that late season continued cycling from the disease. So we're noticing big differences in the spots that did get sprayed versus unsprayed. Yeah. We're also seeing some differences out there in terms of products that only have suppression that were applied in areas that arguably didn't know they always needed the tar spot application. And we're seeing a bit more pressure in those areas as those products typically don't last quite as long or provide as significant control. So we're seeing that impact in fields, and it's going to show. But most of the questions I get now around, do I still go after and spray? We're still learning some of that, but a lot of the data is suggesting past R3, once you get into that dent stage, the return on investment is probably not there. That doesn't mean the risk is gone, but the return on investment is gone.
Our sponsors are the Edible Bean School, Farming Forward, and the Corn School. Big corn yields demand intense management. From tillage to nitrogen management, hybrid selection, pest management, and more, Real Agriculture's Corn School is a video and podcast series that helps you face every moment of the growing season. The Corn School is made possible by support from BASF and Pride Seeds. Learn more at cornschool.com. Okay, so many great questions came in during our clip. I love it. Thank you, everyone, for doing so. So a few different ones. And so in that clip, Greg talks about, potentially the disease still advancing, but it no longer being economic to spray. So let's back up a step and talk about ideal timing of actually going in and controlling this disease. And how do we know if we have to? So, Albert, maybe I'll start with you as far as what have we learned about an early application to manage tar spot?
Yeah, when it comes to, the management and the timing side of it is, right now, as we're all talking about how difficult it is to identify tar spot, that means it's at those low levels. And as Greg had said, and what we've seen consistently is those first 2 weeks of July is when we start seeing those initial lesions, those initial stroma and that. And it takes time to build up. And we've got some slides here that we can talk about that later, but it requires a bit of time to build up until we get that snowballing effect where we start seeing it develop rapidly, and depending on the environmental conditions, that could be a doubling from spore to spore within a week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks, and it all depends on temperature. And Mark here talking about that concern around irrigation, pivot irrigation, leaf wetness coming in some of the discussions. That is critically important. That leaf wetness, we always talk about potential for rains and that's great. And we needed the rain. We got 2 inches of rain over, in the past week here in West Elgin, and that's great. But it's been so hot and that humidity, and you feel it when you walk out. And if you're a disease or a pathogen, you just love that. You thrive for that. That's like me having a case of beer or so. It's just, it's fun, right? And so that tied in with temperatures and that dew period too. Those 7 hours of leaf wetness really drive this disease, and that makes that leaf environment really conducive to that spore landing, that spore germinating, and then ultimately that spore infecting the leaf in that. And these hot, dry conditions that we've seen up to just recently, and with the temperature, it will slow things down potentially early on in the season. And so we've seen that in the past. And if we go to slide number 3, the crop risk tool there, Jay, you'll see what I'm talking about. What we try to do, and this is a lot of work that Damon Smith and others have done, but Damon Smith's group out of Wisconsin has really been driving this. So we used to talk about Tar Spotter app for modeling, for scouting, predicting tar spot. This is a new tool on our cropprotectionnetwork.org called the Crop Risk Tool, and it's got corn, soybeans, tomatoes, potatoes, a whole bunch of other crops here. And so what I did here was just put together for Rodney, Simcoe, as well as Kempville, and then into Quebec. And you can see that early on, up to a week ago or so, our conditions have been favorable. And if I pull it up for the past 4 years, early on in the season, we're in that 80 to 100% favorable conditions or high risk. And just recently, we start seeing that decline over the past week or two because of the hot, dry conditions. Now,
Right.
that doesn't mean that we won't have tar spot. That just means that we're in a less favorable environment for those new infections. Those infections that already started to occur a couple of weeks ago are there, and they'll start to show.
Mm-hmm. I don't like the look of the Kempville graph, Albert. So thanks for that.
Well, so when you start thinking about, so, those first
Yeah.
two, the Rodney and Simcoe, are those established
Yeah.
areas. Those
Right.
newer areas like Kempville, Quebec, and that with those cooler temperatures, that could actually end up being much more favorable for tar spot early on
Yeah.
and down the road.
Yeah, thanks. That's what I noticed. Okay, so Stephanie, this is I mean it's a great visual to sort of look at it like building up those risk factors. And as we've learned, it is that period of leaf wetness that has to be extended. So you've tackled this several years in a row. Once you've scouted, you found it. We know it's that 7, maybe 12, maybe 14, maybe 21 days in between. So what is the plan for a field that you've identified tar spot? Are you going back, at set times? Because to me, it just feels like making that call on the fungicide pass is just, there's a lot at stake. If conditions aren't going to be conducive, then, maybe you don't have to worry about it. So how do you sort of gauge a field where you've identified it and leading up to that fungicide pass?
Well, it's always a conversation around hybrid selection, crop rotation, and your management. So depending on where you are, if it's 1 year of corn after beans, if it's a few years of corn, I feel like it's a bit of a different conversation. And if with all the work that's been done on hybrid selection and which ones have some tolerance versus don't, and kind of where you are within that spectrum. So we try and make the best decision possible. And I like to time it around that VTR1 to make sure that you can capitalize on both tar spot and potentially your dawn and jib timing at the same time, because we don't want to forget about 2018 and kind of the years before that where we had issues with other diseases. And I also like to have the conversation around it's not necessarily just a tar spot focus. You have to look at all the diseases and identify your risk and what level of risk you're comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
Yeah.
It becomes a balance, right? It's a balance of what your risks are and what your concerns are. And, when you read, say, some of the info from my colleagues in the U.S. and that, they start talking about just maybe pre-tassel applications and then come back with an R2, R3 application window. And that works for Southern Illinois, Southern Indiana, and some of those areas that maybe don't have that jib risk as well. And so for us, one of the good news stories is that timing around that silking timing, which we're approaching quite quickly, and that has been the most consistent when it comes to that control for tar spot and that return on investment, and that's been one of the good things. But again, you can't forget the northern corn leaf blights, the jibs. It's a balance when it comes to these diseases.
Right, and yes, I will say, and I think around here we're not seeing tassels yet, but it really will be a very short time before we are, and so we are reaching that sort of critical time. To Greg's clip there, the discussion of later season. So I and correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe actually Stephanie, maybe you can tell me, for growers that, let's say, detected it, maybe didn't control, or perhaps had imperfect passes, because we've also seen those wonderful check strips that maybe were not on purpose check strips. But we do see this disease, definitely, because it continues to cycle, it can look pretty ugly later in the season. How do you tackle sort of that later season discussion of, okay, it looks bad, but there's not actually an economic amount of control that we could get here? How do you work through that discussion?
Yeah, I think you got to be realistic and say, okay, how many days to harvest is there? Because there are pre-harvest intervals with any product that you're going to use. But again, how does that leaf look around the cob, and has it moved down into the canopy that much? And what's the environment look like from now until harvest? Like, is Mother Nature cooperating or being uncooperative? And let's make a decision based on that. And do we have the resources to get it done?
Right, because that's the other question. Okay, so some really good questions here. I'm going to ask Mark's first, I think, and then Kevin's on crop residue. But Albert, one of the key things that we love to talk about is crop rotation. Because this is a disease that can overwinter, so it will be in the environment, but also blows in. Stephanie's alluded to, looking at field history. Does it play a significant role in increasing that inoculum if we've got corn on corn or a lot of corn in the rotation?
Yeah, there definitely is a slight increase with corn in the rotation. Corn, and corn. Actually, our trials here, we're going 3-4 years of corn right now, but we also establish it in first year corn as well. And so crop rotation on its own can help reduce it up to a point. But because of that secondary movement from elsewhere, blowing those spores in. So again, you can burn it. You can get rid of all the residue. I think Mark asked the question about was it Mark there? But one of the Kevin asked about crop residues and reducing that. And that again, removing the crop residue probably reduces it more than the crop rotation side. But both of those alone are not very as effective as what we see with hybrids or fungicides when it comes to managing tar spot. It can help reduce it, but contrary to all my other discussions around diseases and that, where crop rotation and residue management play a big factor, that's where Johnson and I get into that whole tillage thing and the importance of iron and disease management that he doesn't like comes out. But when it comes to tar spot, those two are not as critically important as what we see, or the benefit as we see with hybrids and fungicides.
Okay. Now, Jeanette has a great point, and Stephanie, I think you alluded to this as well. There are other leaf diseases in corn. Now, Jeanette's based in Manitoba, so the fungicide decision is a different one. It's perhaps more complex because it may not pay all years if conditions aren't right. In Ontario, we usually get the rain, so it's usually worth it. But they're generally not economic, but tar spot seems more aggressive. So how has tar spot sort of changed the fungicide decision for growers in your area?
Absolutely. I would say when I started 11 years ago, fungicides were not a major driver for a lot of corn growers in my trading area, but definitely now it is a huge conversation, if not a strategy that is worked into their crop plan for the year. It has significant economic impact. I mean, we've seen huge yield losses from this disease, but I mean, there are other diseases like Northern that can rob yield as well. So again, I mean, so can Don and Jib. Like, there's all these diseases, and now it just seems to be more prevalent. And based on the environment we're in, we do see a lot more fungicide use.
Mm-hmm. Warren wants to know, and Warren, I didn't think you thought about cows anymore. Does a cow kill the inoculum? As in, if you fed infected silage, will manure move it? This is a great question. I tend to believe that the rumen kills most bad things, but that's because I have livestock. So I believe in the rumen. Albert, do we know anything about this?
We don't have an answer yes or no on that side, but we do suspect that it will not make it through the digestive system in this particular case. Now, the other side is there's just so much other inoculum that maybe we can give cows a little bit of a benefit and not use them as a vector for tar spot.
Okay. Thank you, Albert. The cows also thank you. Okay, so Mark says we've been using a corn soy wheat rotation, but moved to a corn on corn soy wheat this year to help reduce white mold in beans. Did I just kick myself in the butt? Well, Mark, yes, you did, but maybe for different reasons. Anyway, Albert, what say you is putting corn on corn really going to make a huge difference there?
Yeah, so it elevates your risk a little bit, but not a lot, because again, those first couple of fields, those couple of years when tar spot starts to establish in that area, then sure, it's more isolated, but after that 2 or 3 years, it becomes a communal issue. And so, no, I wouldn't say that. There's enough spores around to share amongst everybody.
Sure. Like Jason Lenders asks, what's your take on the impact of sweet corn given harvest occurs significantly earlier? Stephanie, do you want to take that, or Albert, do you want it?
Steph, you want it, or?
Yeah,
I would say there's still an impact to the sweet corn, and it does get a fungicide application earlier on. just to protect it and plant health. So I think there's still an importance to protecting the sweet corn, but again, scouting, making sure you know your varieties. They do have good ratings, I believe, on those ones. So just asking the questions and making sure you're out there scouting.
Do we
Yeah,
have to worry about the sweet corn being basically letting the disease develop and spreading to our silage or grain corn?
at that
Or no?
point, we've got enough commercial corn and silage around to fill that void, right? At that point. But sweet corn is a susceptible host. But again, that management side, particularly if you're planting a little earlier when the weather conditions are less favorable, you may avoid some of the disease. But that managing and harvesting earlier, as Jason said, for silage producers, that's also a tool that can be utilized too. If they start seeing tar spot there, they can get in there earlier into those fields, make sure that they can manage their potential milk quality, fiber quality, etc. of that silage.
Okay. Yep. Always a good point. Now we've talked a little bit, and so I think, can we go to, I think, Jay, it's slide 4 with tar spotter, because one of the things that I find interesting about this disease is the latent period, or these cycles, right? That this is
Yep.
how it changes. So walk us through, Albert. What does this graph show, and how do we use it in the field?
Yeah, so normally that first 2 weeks of July is when we see tar spot in that, and so this is just going back to tar spotter or the crop risk tool in terms of looking at the risk for tar spot as we had for those sites in Rodney and Kempville, etc. And so on the left you can see the tar spotter risk. The higher, almost 100%, the higher the blue bar, the more risk. The lower, less risk. And you can see, as we've seen on all of those, is that regardless of where you are in the province, that early environment is critically important, right, and favorable. So cooler conditions, moist, wet conditions, all those environmental conditions that drive tar spot are pretty well ubiquitous for us in Ontario. Where things start to change is right now, or usually that first or second week of July, when the temperature, we start getting into those hot days of summer. And we've seen that, and this is from last year, and you can see after July 5th, you start seeing those bars go down. And I think somebody, I'm not sure if it was Warren or Stephanie and others, mentioned gibberella ear rot in that and the risk, or Greg mentioned that in his video clip there and that. So last year, for instance, we had very favorable conditions. Then it got hot and dry during silking, which ties in with that tassel and our silking stage in that mid to late July period. And you can see that was less favorable for both gib infection and dawn, as well as tar spot. And then as we start seeing the cooler temperatures and more rain and that coming back, we start building that up. And so looking at this, that incubation period is from that residue to that new plant, which takes about 3 weeks to 4 weeks, a month. And then that latent period means that it goes from that residue and infects that plant produces spores, or the tar spot produces spores on that new plant, and then those spores infect and start the cycle again. And that usually takes about 45 to 60 days. So those lesions that we're seeing right now occurred 30 days ago, 40 days ago.
Okay. So, Stephanie, when you look at this, and it is sort of a mirror of temperature almost, right? So the very hottest are those lowest. And as we move that way, how do you use, recognizing the severity increasing as the weather is favorable and as that snowball effect, how do you use that when you're managing the fungicide decision? We'll start there, and then I want to talk hybrids after that.
Yeah, so I mean, you have to look at kind of what the forecast is going to be, and if you're in that environment, no different than white mold, no different than other diseases that we try and manage, even in wheat, right? When we're talking about wheat, is it going to be hot and dry? Is it going to be wet? What do we do to protect against these diseases? So I think, as the temperature increases, we have a lower risk, but then you also have to be concerned about humidity and leaf wetness, like Albert talked about. And I think, it just comes to that conversation around what hybrid do you have? What are your concerns? And I think it's just becoming a management decision. And a lot of people down in this area have realized that it's super important that we're doing this and getting coverage on this crop when it's most important. And from the work Albert's done, that VTR1 is proving to be that critical time period to get it done.
Rob Miller shares he was in a field south of London today and there was still water on the leaves at 1 p.m. That seems like a long time, Albert.
No, we're wet all the time in
You're
there
fine.
right now.
So
Sorry, you know what I mean. But
yeah, exactly.
but and so that's the key there, right? So we're at that critical point now that we make that decision: are we going to spray or not spray it for tar spot? Now remember, gibberella ear rot, and now most growers are targeting gibberella and tar spot at the same time. And as Stephanie mentioned, when I started, we didn't even talk about fungicides for corn, right? And it's greatly changed over the past 10 years. And for what growers are seeing in the Southwest or in those areas that have been dealing with tar spot, it's the return that they're seeing, the impact, the visual, the yields, what they're seeing in terms of dollars for them, that it's become a tool that shows that return on investment and that. But what's going to really drive the disease, and what always drives the disease every year at this time, is what's going to happen now that we found it, and now as we move into silking and post silking into the R stages, is that what's the next 2 to 3 weeks going to be? What's the duration in terms of, is it going to be hot? Is it going to be cooler? Is it going to be, how quick are we going to change from these hot temperatures, you said 30, 32 degrees and that, to those more moderate temperatures, right? And so for moderate, right now we're looking, that would be 27 degrees Celsius or below, and those nighttime temperatures. And if we look at the forecast over the next 2 weeks, we're going to go into that, I'm not going to say cooler period, because upper 20s are still warm, but those nighttime temperatures are going to be down towards that 20, 21 or so, which is more into that favorable conditions for tar spot. And we see that constantly over the years, that build up with those bars, the risk after pollination, and see that build up.
Now, Dan's got a great share here. Last year, averaged 60 bushels advantage to spraying versus missed areas. And when I say those unintended checks, I mean, a missed area is never fun. It's probably going to happen by the road, but it really does at least give you an infield view of just how valuable that fungicide pass was. Now, we have to go to our last read of the night, but then I do want to talk about sort of that decision of that staying power of those fungicides and how long they can actually protect, because I think that's an important point. So Producer Jay, if you would, we'll go to our last read of the night. The Agronomist is brought to you by Farming Forward, the Corn School, and the Edible Bean School. From planting and seeding to fertility and nutrient management decisions to harvest and storage, Real Agriculture's Edible Bean School is a video series that tackles every part of the edible bean growing season in an engaging and informative format. The Edible Bean School is made possible through sponsorship by Hensel Co-op. Check out more at realagriculture.com/ediblebeanschool. So, Stephanie, if a grower goes out at that ideal staging, the R1, how long will that fungicide offer protection, or does it depend?
Absolutely, it depends. I mean, it depends on the fungicide you're choosing. Are you using a premium multi-mode of action fungicide or a different fungicide? So I think it will depend on the fungicide you choose, but I would say a good 4 weeks you can guarantee. There's no guarantees of fungicide, but a good 4-week period where you're going to get protection from, and if not, a little bit longer, depending on the fungicide you choose.
Okay, so that sounds pretty good, Albert, but that may not be enough. Maybe?
Yeah. No, again, there's only the viability or the length of usefulness of the fungicides are only there for so long. And, that 4-week window, I would push more towards, say, 3 weeks for most of them, especially under favorable conditions. And remember, with tar spot, it's a numbers game, right? And we've seen those. So with, Dan's comment about those missed areas and that, the other side of all of this is, Stephanie mentioned, we've got great products. So you can choose the right product. You can hit it at the right time. If you don't get it where it needs to be, as those miss areas that Dan mentioned, you can see the impact real quick, right? And the other side of that is it might not even be the missed areas. It might be areas where maybe you haven't had that dosage, that coverage isn't adequate. So you have sublethal doses. So you have enough to slow it down, but not stall tar spot or control it to the point that you would expect. So the one thing about tar spot and fungicides and what to expect is that if it's not done correctly or so, the advantage goes to tar spot. It will let you know if you're doing a good job or not pretty quickly.
Okay. Now, we've mentioned, of course, hybrid selection. We've mentioned that there are differences, of course, in the hybrids out there that growers have to choose from. Stephanie, as you work with customers on making some of these decisions, has it been relatively straightforward to try and find the better, or is it still a bit of trial and error? How has that experience been in trying to make some of these choices with tar spot in mind?
On hybrid selection,
Mm-hmm.
are we? Yeah, so I would say there's been a ton of work that's been done. Is it still perfectly straightforward? No, because it takes so long, for all these hybrids to come to the market, and then we change them quite quickly. So there's been a ton of work done, and I think it's getting much better. I would say back in 2020, it was quite difficult to figure out which ones were good. But now that the disease is here and the pressure is here, you definitely can see the difference in tolerance between these hybrids.
Yep. And Albert, do we call it tolerance or resistance?
We do not have anything resistant. And Jay, if you put up that hybrid slide up there, we have nothing we call about resistance in terms of tar spot. We are talking about partial resistance or tolerance. And we've been doing a lot of work with the companies and that, evaluating, supporting their evaluations for tar spot hybrid ratings and that. And this is just from last year. We had 98 different hybrids there, and you can see the progression. Each one of those lines is a different hybrid, and you can see pretty well across the board as we get into that late August timeframe, we start seeing the disease rapidly increase from those initial low levels to those more favorable, and that's when the disease is really wrapping up to that 7 to 14-day cycling or doubling and that. And so one thing when you got your hybrids and this year, get out there and look at those hybrids. The hybrids will tell you how well they perform as well in terms of tar spot. And on there, you can see your typical tar spot on the left image there of just a happy tar spot. You see those beautiful tar spot lesions there. Sorry, Lyndsey. And then on the right side, you can see tar spot is there as well on this other hybrid. But you notice a few things. First of all, you should notice that there's a lot less stroma there, a lot less infection there. They're also smaller. You also see more of a yellowing around it, so that's telling you the plant's trying to kill that or limit the impact or development or infection area that's being impacted. And those are critically important because if you got smaller stroma, less of them, that means you get less spores. So that really reduces that slope up. And you can see on the right there, those few that we have on the bottom, towards the bottom there, those have less tar spot, so you can see that they are better at tolerating tar spot than some of the ones above, those higher susceptible ones. But that doesn't mean when it comes to hybrid selection, do we just go everything into tolerant hybrids and forget those high yielding susceptible hybrids? No, because there is also a yield potential. You've got to weigh all the factors and everything, not only disease, but all the other characteristics, standability, if you're silage, all of those things that you need, that you take when you select that hybrid's critically important. And remember, some of those high yielding susceptible hybrids are there because they're high yielding, right? And so some of them having 20, 30 bushels to their advantage or so, you're giving that up in some cases. So again, we have a place for those tolerant hybrids. We're getting more and more of them down the road, and we're making a lot of progress there and identifying resistant sources as well. But those high yielding susceptible hybrids, we can make them work with our well selected fungicide timing and those fungicides we have available. We've had anywhere from 60, 80 to 100 bushels there as well. So again, the return on investment's there. And again, it's looking at it as a full integrated tar spot management program.
Stephanie, you were nodding your head. I'm going to guess you've got some growers that have some really standout hybrids that they're going to choose. So then it's really just about protecting that plant if they're susceptible.
Exactly. And I see a kind of a comment about sprayer boom and are they tall enough to go over the corn? Not every sprayer is if they don't have a lift kit, but a product is only as good as it is applied. So you can have the best product in the world, but if you're not getting coverage on that plant because your boom is hitting the top of the corn, you're not being effective at managing this disease. So it's not just the product or the tolerance of a hybrid. There's a lot that goes into it.
Jeanette, there are no dumb questions on the agronomists because now I'm going to follow up to that one and it's a good point, and I love that we're going to call it a lift kit because it is, but that just makes me think of like pickup trucks, not sprayers. Anyway, so lift kits. The second thing though is that so when I think about disease management, I think about when I'm spraying, I'm trying to protect the plant part that is susceptible. Or in the case of like white mold, I'm trying to target the petals. So sclerotinia with canola as well. I want to protect the petals because that's the food source. So what is Albert, how do you want to target silks, but you also want to target leaves at the same time? What does the spray pass?
Sorry, am I back on or did I lose you guys?
Yeah, no, you're there. It just looks like everything froze, but we're just going to continue. So go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So on that side of things, so the good news is that it comes down to, again, getting the product where you need to. So whether you're using drop nozzles that can help you get into that canopy, over the top, aerial, whether airplane, helicopters, all of those have worked out very effectively when it comes to fungicides and tar spot, as well as gibberella ear rot. So, all of those methods can work very well. Again, it's paying attention to details and getting it there. Some of the work we've done with Dave Hooker, Jason DeVoe, and others in terms of our spray rodeos and same thing in the U.S. and combinations of, say, a drop nozzle with over the top can get you that coverage all the way through from that mid canopy all the way up through from the ear all the way up to the top. But again, we've seen these results, these 20, 40, 60 bushels or more with various different types of configurations. And it's been an assurance to our growers in that the tar spot can be managed. You don't have to go and spend a lot of money on new equipment and all that stuff. It's just paying that attention to details. And what we found out, some of the things we've learned really is that fungicides will work, but tar spot shows its limitations if you don't get it on there right. Timing is critical. We can be too early. We can be too late. That return on investment right now continues to be that one app. Down the road, will we be needing a second app later on? That's time. Time will tell if we need that. They haven't really paid overall just yet. But one thing that will be, we have to change our mindset is, I don't think we're ever going to have 100% clean corn in southwestern Ontario or in the province if you've got tar spot there. We're always going to have a little bit at the end. If you're trying to chase it to the point you got no tar spot, you're not going to be making any money.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's no different than Don and Jib, right? It's a reduction in the levels. There's nothing that's going to protect completely against it. It's trying to reduce that severity.
Right. And we can't cure it. We're just trying to stop it from that snowball effect. We're trying to slow that down. And this is a great image in the middle that sort of shows the effect of the hybrid selection, but just that you can slow it down and slow down that process and the severity. Now, one last point, and I know we mentioned this, but I think it when we think about diseases, these are the things that come up. Of course, we touched on rotation. We've talked about hybrid selection, but Kevin wants to know about crop residue. And I know this comes up for some other diseases. Does removal of crop residue reduce the risk in following years? Or so should you be chopping silage or baling stalks after the combine? Should you be trying, Albert, to get that residue to break down faster? Or is it trying to spit on a fire?
Yeah. So again, that residue, as we mentioned earlier, if you remove it, sure, it will reduce your risk, marginally, maybe an extra 10 or 20%. It won't eliminate that risk as we do with other diseases and that because of that ability for those spores to come back in and infect. And as we've seen in 2021, we had very little. We had some in Stephanie's area, some down my way in West Elgin and Chatham, Kent, but that was it. There was maybe 10 fields in total going into the winter of 2020, and 2021 was probably one of our worst down here in terms of tar spot. And that was not from our Ontario grown tar spot. That was all that inoculum coming from the US. And that's the other issue here. And that's why it's important, whether it's the cropprotectionnetwork.org website where we track tar spot and other diseases in real time, listening to Real Ag, company info that Stephanie and others come out with as well, our information as well. Being aware of what's going on elsewhere really drives it. And, for those areas, whether Manitoba, Eastern Ontario, Quebec, and that, see what's going on here as well as in New York State, Pennsylvania, all of those areas, because you're going to see that movement up that East Coast. And we're already seeing that in Pennsylvania, New York, on target, just like the Midwest and Ontario.
It also makes me think that you're going to need a face guard and going to be scouting much later in the season, Warren, than you maybe want to. So I guess, Stephanie, that's one last question that I would have then is, you're in an area that it's relatively common to find tar spot, but let's say the next few weeks aren't super conducive. Is there a point where you stop looking for it? Like when about in the season? As you mentioned, we have pre-harvest intervals and those sorts of things. When does that usually sort of play out as far as this is sort of you get what you get and you might get upset, but we're kind of done here?
Well, I think you still need to scout probably up to R3, and then at that point, I don't know if there's an economic return based on the work that's been done. So I think we kind of go, target that VT application R1 and make sure we're scouting as many fields as we can, have a look and make that decision. But again, if we know the environment's going to change or if the weather patterns have changed, it's worth taking a look at your fields too and making that decision.
Mm-hmm. Warren adds, in fungicide and genetics we trust. Amen.
Yeah.
Yes.
So on those late apps there, those post R3 ones, we're talking about the return on investment side of things. And, our goal here is, with our main three fungicides that are out there, whether it's the Veltima DLX, the Delero Complete, the Mervis Neo, all of those products are effective against tar spot, gibberella, ear rot, and all those, and we target that main window through that silken time frame because of that. But those later ones where you're trying to, maybe it's silage or maybe it's quality or something else that you're targeting or you're trying to suppress the inoculum for down the road. Our work has shown that basically all our fungicides that we applied against tar spot work against it. It can control it. Those three are the best. Others can do it too. So again, and this is where we're starting to see the change in the US where you target those premium products and then come in with a generic product that's much cheaper or something down the road. And that's where a lot of growers are asking about, if I get something that's really cheap, maybe I'll go in there and it'll suppress and save me some yield on that side. And that's some of the work we're doing right now, looking at those really late apps with some more economical fungicides to see if we can change that as well.
I think the price of corn needs to go up first. But anyway, sorry, Stephanie.
Yeah, that's an important piece there.
It is.
That's a big piece.
Yeah.
Well, I even think future factor, it might be the opposite way where we're going to have to spray earlier with a different fungicide, right, depending on the disease cycle. So it just comes down to basically scouting your fields and making sure you know what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, it's a good point, Stephanie, sort of making sure that you're using the best product and protecting those silks for all those other reasons, not just for tar spot. So maybe a different product or a second pass comes before or after. Really good point. Okay. Fantastic show. Great discussion. thank you both so much. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm a little worried about Mark's diet, but that's okay. It's all going to be okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Of course, in the comments, great questions. I really appreciate it. Next week, we're going to talk about phosphorus and potassium. So come on back next week, 8 p.m. Eastern. And Warren is making some pleas about R3 passes. So we'll see what we can do, Warren. All right, Albert, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me here on The Agronomists. I appreciate it. Cheers, everybody. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks.